2014, Elizabeth Holmes was on the cover of Forbes magazine. She was 30 years old. She was worth an estimated $4.5 billion. She was being called the next Steve Jobs. Her company, Theranos, was valued at $9 billion. It was going to revolutionize medicine. It was going to save millions of lives. There was just one problem. None of it was real. The technology didn't work. The tests were inaccurate. The results were being falsified. And real patients, people making medical decisions about their health, their cancer, their pregnancies, were receiving results that were wrong. This is the story of the most sophisticated fraud in Silicon Valley history, and of the woman who almost got away with it. To understand Theranos, you need to understand what it claimed to do. Blood testing is one of the most fundamental tools in modern medicine. Doctors use it to diagnose disease, monitor treatment, and make life or death decisions. Traditionally, blood tests require a needle inserted into a vein, a significant volume of blood, and days of waiting for results from a certified laboratory. Theranos said it had eliminated all of that. Its device, called the Edison, could allegedly run hundreds of different blood tests using just a few drops of blood from a finger prick. No needles, no lab. Results in hours, not days, and at a fraction of the normal cost. If it worked, it would have been one of the most important medical breakthroughs in a generation. The key phrase is, if it worked. Elizabeth Holmes was born in Washington, D.C. in 1984. She grew up in a family with a tradition of high achievement. From an early age, she was obsessed with becoming successful in a way that mattered. She enrolled at Stanford University in 2002 to study chemical engineering. She was 18 years old. By 19, she had dropped out. She took her tuition money, approximately $3,000, and used it to found a company she initially called Real-Time Cures. She later renamed it Theranos, a combination of the words therapy and diagnosis. Her pitch was simple and powerful. She was terrified of needles, and she believed millions of people avoided critical blood tests because of that same fear. If she could make testing painless and accessible, she could save lives. It was a compelling story, and Holmes was a compelling storyteller. She had an almost hypnotic presence. She spoke in a deep, deliberate voice. She dressed exclusively in black turtlenecks, a deliberate echo of Steve Jobs, whom she openly admired. She didn't just have a product, she had a mission. And in Silicon Valley, a mission can be worth more than her first major backer was Tim Draper, a prominent Silicon Valley venture capitalist who had known Holmes since she was a child. He invested early and with conviction. Others followed. But what made Theranos unusual and what made the fraud so effective was the type of investors Holmes attracted. Rather than targeting the technology community, which might have asked harder questions about the science, Holmes filled her board with political and military heavyweights who knew nothing about blood diagnostics. Her board included George Shultz, former US Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, former National Security Advisor, James Mattis, future Secretary of Defense, William Perry, former Secretary of Defense. These were not scientists, they were power brokers, and their presence sent a signal to the rest of the world. This company is legitimate, this technology is real, this woman is the future. By 2013, Theranos had secured a partnership with Walgreens to install testing centers in stores across the country. By 2014, the valuation hit $9 billion. Holmes graced the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and Time magazine. She gave a TED talk. She was invited to the White House. The story was perfect. which is exactly why no one looked closely enough at the science. Here is what was actually happening inside Theranos. The Edison device could not do what Holmes claimed. The machine was capable of running only a small number of tests, and even those produced results that were unreliable. For the vast majority of tests offered to patients, the company was secretly using conventional commercial machines and running the blood through those machines after diluting the finger prick samples. The dilution itself introduced errors. The results were inconsistent. Some were dangerously inaccurate. Patients were receiving false positives for HIV, false positives for cancer, incorrect readings for drug dosages. Medical decisions were being made based on numbers that bore no reliable relationship to reality. Inside the company, employees who raised concerns were silenced, dismissed, or threatened with legal action. Holmes and her partner Sunny Balwani ran Theranos with an atmosphere of secrecy and intimidation that employees would later describe as cult-like. The culture was simple. Believe in the mission, ask no questions, and never speak to anyone outside the company about what you saw inside.
First crack appeared
For
from
years.
an unlikely source.
Tyler Schultz was 22 years old when he joined Theranos as a laboratory employee in 2013. He was also the grandson of George Schultz, the former Secretary of State who sat on the Theranos board. Tyler Schultz believed in the mission. What he found inside the company disturbed him deeply. Tests were producing inconsistent results. Quality control data was being manipulated. When he raised his concerns internally, he was dismissed and warned to stay silent. He went to his grandfather. George Schultz told him to trust Elizabeth Holmes. So Tyler Schultz went outside. He contacted regulators. He submitted complaints. He documented what he had seen. Theranos responded by hiring private investigators to follow him. The company's lawyers threatened him with lawsuits. Even his own grandfather temporarily sided against him. Tyler Schultz held firm. The exposure that finally brought Theranos down came from a different direction. John Carreyrou was an investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal. In 2015, he received a tip suggesting that Theranos' technology was not what the company claimed. Carreyrou spent months investigating. He spoke to former employees, scientists, and medical experts. He obtained internal documents. He found patients whose test results had been demonstrably wrong. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published his investigation. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Federal regulators conducted their own inspection of Theranos facilities. What they found confirmed everything. In 2016, regulators banned Elizabeth Holmes from operating any medical laboratory for 2 years. They revoked Theranos' laboratory certification. They shut down its operations entirely. The Walgreens partnership collapsed. The $9 billion valuation evaporated. Rupert Murdoch had invested $125 million. He recovered approximately $1. Holmes's personal net worth, estimated at $4.5 billion at the peak.
The legal consequences were slower,
but ultimately severe. In June 2018, the US Department of Justice indicted Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. Holmes's trial began in August 2021. The defense argued she had genuinely believed in her technology and that her failures were those of an overly optimistic entrepreneur, not a criminal. The jury did not fully accept that argument. In January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of fraud. In November of that year, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. She entered prison in May 2023. Sunny Balwani was tried separately and convicted on all 12 counts. He was sentenced to nearly 13 years. So what does Theranos actually teach us? First, secrecy is not the same as intellectual property. Holmes justified Theranos' extreme secrecy by claiming she was protecting proprietary technology. But legitimate companies in regulated industries submit their technology to peer review and independent validation. The secrecy wasn't protecting a breakthrough, it was hiding the absence of one. Second, the halo effect is one of the most dangerous forces in investing. Theranos raised hundreds of millions of dollars not because investors evaluated the science. They invested because of who else was involved. Credibility borrowed from unrelated domains is not the same as credibility earned in the relevant one. Third, the gap between vision and reality is acceptable until it isn't. Silicon Valley has always celebrated founders who overpromise, then build toward the promise. Holmes took this philosophy into a domain where it was medically dangerous. The normal tolerance for startup exaggeration does not apply when real patients are receiving real test results. The line between visionary founder and fraudster is not always clear until it is crossed. Theranos crossed it long before anyone with power chose to look. John Carreyrou wrote a book about the investigation called Bad Blood. It became a bestseller. Tyler Schultz, the whistleblower who risked everything to expose the truth, became an advocate for corporate transparency. The patients whose results were wrong are still waiting for a full accounting. If you found this useful, the next case is already waiting. Subscribe and you won't miss it.